Happy Sunday, everybody. As we come to the close of the week one of Bloomburrow, I've selected quite a few decks here this week that all had a successfully piloted to Mythic, 60% or more win rate, and at least 50 matches. So the idea of this is kind of to explore the decks that have been successfully getting to Mythic that are outside of the typical meta decks that I talk about on Mondays during my best of one, best of three meta review. And the first one that I'd like to start off here is Boros Tokens by BU X. And they went 70 and 21 for a 77% win rate. And this deck is really well positioned in the meta because it absolutely counters the mono red prowess and the Rakdos prowess builds, while also being really good against the mono black discard. It does struggle a little bit with the Boros and Jeskai Convoke decks, but the ones that are the most popular, I think, are the mono black and the mono red prowess builds. So this is pretty well positioned. I've seen several people other than BU take it to Mythic with very high percentage win rates, and it's very common that we'll see an aggressive strategy like Prowess come out first in rotation and kind of set the pace. Establish turn 3 is kind of like you need to have interaction if you're not playing the turn 3 game. We usually see some sort of thing like, a new mechanic kind of come in, like a lot of the hand hate from mono black discard, making it more difficult for the control space. And so this is kind of the natural, counter to those two meta defining strategies. And I hope people like it because I know a lot of people are like, nerf mono red, nerf mono black discard. So this deck is kind of the balancing force in the meta for that. And I'll kind of explain why. So the Elspeth Smite and the Torch the Tower, the Get Lost, and the Lightning Helix give you plenty of options for eliminating the targets of the combat tricks in mono red prowess. And then the mono black discard deck naturally struggles against strategies that are not a one-for-one trade. So they're naturally weak to the go-wide strategies of like Celestia Rabbits and Boros Convoke, to which this deck is doing some of that with the token production of like Vraska's Forge, Carrot Cake creating multiple 1/1s, Caretaker's Talent creating a copy of a token, as well as becoming tokens getting +2/+2. And then whenever a token enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So this card draw really helps counter the mono black discard. We've got the Archangel Elspeth, which can give you counters with lifelink, which further helps you stabilize against the aggressive strategies. Beza is like a Sunset Revelry built into a creature, so if you're being pressured, it's often creating 2/1/1 fish and gaining you 4 life. And then we've got Sunfall, and really the reason why you have some sweepers in this deck is in hopes, same with the temporary lockdowns, is trying to increase the matchup against the Celestia Rabbits and the Boros Convoke, which this deck is a little bit weak to. But this one's definitely worth checking out. The other thing too is Sunken Citadel works really nicely in combination with the Fountain Port. Being able to tap for 2 mana to activate abilities of land sources makes the more expensive cost of creating the tokens off of this easier to pay. So I think the Sunken Citadel with the Fountain Port works really well in the token archetype. And then we've got Demolition Field, which is to answer some problematic manlands. I don't know if it's really necessary because this isn't like fully a control list, but there are some problematic manlands that are good to have answers for. Mishra's Foundry's still around, and like the Simic manland, the Golgari manland, etc. So that'll be the number one. The other thing too, if you're new here, what I do every Sunday is put up a poll. So usually I whittle down the selection to 4. And this week, because it's the, really people exploring the new meta in Bloomburrow, I have 11. So I'm going to whittle it down after I show you the decks. And maybe I'll continue to do that in the future. Because the downside is that like some people are going to be like, why didn't it make it onto the poll? The upside, though, is that you guys get to see more decks. So I think it makes sense to like include it all. But so that'll be number 1, and this one's definitely going to make it on the poll, because if it's and if it loses on the poll, I'm still going to play it because of how well positioned it is in the meta. Second up on the list is the Vraska OTK deck that is centered around the Innkeeper's Talent. Being able to, so if you have this at level 3, if you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds on that permanent or player instead, which works really well with Vraska, being able to ultimate. And so the counters come in, you get additional loyalty counters, and then you also can pop this off and give somebody like 18 poison counters in 1 ultimate, right? So that's the 1 turn kill, is Innkeeper's Talent plus Vraska's Betrayal of Sting. The rest of the deck is kind of just centered around a Golgari sort of control shell. So we've got removal like Cut Down, Shieldred's Edict, Cruel Claw's Heist, kind of as a way to hate on our opponent's hand as well as get additional resources. Mosswood Dread Knight is a recurring thing that's kind of problematic for control decks unless they can exile it. Pop Hatch Formation, haven't really seen this one before, but gives you a disenchant, gives you some of that enchantment hate, which is good against like the enchantment heavy decks of maybe Boros Convoke running the Case of the Gateway Express and the the Anthem that I'm blanking the name on. But worst case is you can cycle this and create a food token, which can help stabilize against the mono, like the aggressive builds. So interesting to see how this one plays. Terra Sunder also gives us some artifact and enchantment hate, as well as just can be a removal if you kick it. Assassin's Trophy, similar thing, more removal, but ramps our opponent. We don't really care about the ramping of our opponent too much in this deck because we're just trying to make it to our OTK combo. Liliana the Veil, again, either hating on their hand if they're control, or because like one of the weaknesses is they have counter spells. This one deciding to not run the Cavern of Souls. But so we can hate on their hand in several different ways to ensure that they're not blocking our combo. Deadly Cover-Up gives us a Wrath against the board flood strategies of Boros Convoke and Celestia Rabbits. And then we've got Virtue Persistence, which is early removal, giving you that 2 life and the -3/-3. And then later is a win condition if your Vraska plan fails. But you have to be playing off of their stuff because this is a 0 creatures build. So can be a little bit of a dead card if you come up against another, like come up against it in the mirror match, right? Excuse me. So decided to include this one because people have been mentioning it in my community, and also it's a fair amount of hype around it just because, like, a 2-card OTK is pretty nice. So that one was piloted 63 and 33 for a 66% win rate, and to hit Mythic number 1173. Third one that caught my attention was Temur Ramp by Raging Clue. Went 101 and 66 for a 60% win rate into Mythic 638. And we've seen kind of a Gruul ramp space being explored, and blue does have some top-end threats that are interesting, like Bonnie Paul Clearcutter. Invasion of Arcavios actually makes the sideboard relevant because it allows you to grab cards from your sideboard. And so that's yeah, you can search for your specific tool set, which I think is kind of cool. We sometimes see it being explored in other decks. So we do have the instant speed interaction for the Slick Shot Show Off decks with like Shock and Abrade. Fires of Victory gives us some good removal as well. Up the Beanstalk, kind of like we see in Domain. Being able to kind of help against the mono black discard decks, being able to draw every time that you're casting something that's cost 5 or more. Now this one's not bringing in white, and so we don't have the Leyline Bindings, which pair really nicely with it. We've got a Braid for artifact hate and instant speed interaction though. And the counterspell 3 steps ahead. Doppelgang is an alternative win condition that you can just, if you have a whole bunch of mana, can work out really nicely. Ancient Cornucopia is commonly in the Domain build too, so this is kind of like an Atraxa-less Domain build, really. But every time that you're playing a multicolored spell, then this gains you life, as well as ramps you by being able to be a mana rock and tap for any color. Realmbreaker, the invasion tree, I think is really put in here for the kind of more grindy mirror matches where the ramp strategy can kind of get shut down, and then it's nice to have something like Jace or Realmbreaker to be able to mill your opponent as an alternative win con. We've got Muera, which is a new one that we got at Outlaws of Thunder Junction. At the beginning of your main phase, you add red or green for each raccoon that you control, and then if you expend 4, you gain 3 life, and if you expend 8, you exile the top 2 cards of your library, and then you can play those cards. So it gives you decent dig as well as ramp. Brotherhood's End is one of the sweepers, as well as Ill-Timed Explosion, controlling the board flood strategies. Hugs is another one that we got in Bloomburrow that can give you a lot of value. So you exile the top X cards of your library, and then you can play those cards. And you can also play additional lands on each of your turns. So it fits into the ramp strategy and the dig strategy, same as like Muera, Trash Tactician. Roxanne, running a full 4 copy here, helps destroy the small little aggro stuff and like keep Boros Convoke in check, while also ramping with the meteorites being able to tap for mana. Yeah, like Invasion of Arcavius, like I mentioned, is gives you additional tools that you can go kind of select the win condition that you need in the specific moment. And we've also got the 4 copies of Bonnie Paul as the top end threat, and the Hornlock Whale, which can give us the early interaction to bounce something, helps stabilize against the early pressure, while then also being a pretty decent threat later in the game. So the one downside with this is it's a 3-color space, so there are a metric ton of lands. Okay, the other thing that I've been seeing a lot is Golgari Midrange, and not doing the Vraska combo, but still including it because it's a decent planeswalker for removal. But this one fits more into an alternative build for Golgari Midrange, so we're not running the Glissa Sunslayers, we still have the Mosswood Dreadknights, exploring the Clifftop Lookout, which was a new card that we got in Bloomburrow that can help us ramp. Also, the Fecund Green Shell, the turtle, can help you get to a really great land count, and as long as you're playing things that have a greater toughness. So this is kind of the Golgari Big Butts build, is another name for it, because as long as you are playing creatures that have the increased toughness, you can then ramp further. And I think some lists lean a little bit more heavily into the actual Big Butts build. But this one I think is going to be a fun one to explore. So we have the Cut Down and the Go for the Throats for the interaction against mono red. We've got the Terra Sunder for a little bit of artifact hate, up the Beanstalk to counter the mono black discard, Liliana of the Veil to help us against the Azorius Control or Sunfall, typically is difficult for a mid-range deck to deal with, so we attack their hand. Aclazotz being a nice recurring threat, and Deadly Cover-Up for a Wrath. And then we've got Nissa as a kind of a win condition, being able to spawn the tokens and also giving you artifact and enchantment hate if you're coming up against like Azorius artifacts. Virtue Persistence is also a win condition, being able to bring back the turtle while being early stabilization. Breach the Multiverse is also a win condition, and Vraska mostly as a removal, but can also end up in some situations killing them with the poison can happen in a really grindy matchup. So I'm not sure if I mentioned that one went 44 and 23 for 66% win rate, and entered Mythic at 619. So the other thing too that the next little bit here is going to be a lot of control options. So right now there's kind of a debate about what space is the best control space, and I think Domain is kind of currently holding the seat, but there's definitely other options, and one of the options is to go into Jeskai Control, giving you some different tools than you would if you were strictly in the Boros, so red-white, or the Azorius or white-blue kind of space. And so we've got plenty of early interaction, Torch the Witness, the Lightning Helix, No More Lies, Get Lost. That all helps with disrupting the early mono red plays. We've got the Temporary Lockdowns and the Brotherhood's End for affecting the board flood strategies. Make Your Move is one that we don't usually see that often, but it's kind of like a Destroy Evil, but attacks power instead of toughness, and costs a little bit more, but also gives you that artifact hate. So really curious to see how Make Your Move plays. Bandit's Hall is in here to kind of give us additional card draw off of all of our interaction, and we've got the 3 steps ahead, but not, or sorry, yeah, 3 steps ahead and the No More Lies for our counter spells. One of the things is if you come up against a control mirror where you're playing up against like Azorius Control, for example, then this deck tends to do worse because you have more dead cards that are focused on attacking creatures and that don't affect your opponent, who's your opponent's control player, and then it usually comes down to who has more counter spells. So keep that in mind. It makes some matchups worse, some matchups better to go into the Jeskai space. The other thing too is that we've got Jace though for the mirror match against other control matchups. Spellgyre as the replacement to Memory Lapse or Memory Deluge. Ill-Timed Explosion as an additional Wrath, as well as Sunfall, so really affecting the board-centric strategies. And then we have Planeswalkers that are alternative win cons. So Teferi being able to kind of give you these creatures that get bigger every time that you draw a card, as well as being able to draw a card as its kind of uptick, because it says 0, but whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty counter on it. Chandra's Hope's Beacon is also another one that's just like a classic Planeswalker win con. And the Ral, Crackling Wit. So one of the things, like, so Teferi, another note I just want to say really quick is that like one of the counters to control that will need to be addressed going forward is mono black discard. And so card draw is how you get around the mono black discard. Jace, the down tick with the -2 actually helps you draw a card. So do keep that in mind. You don't necessarily need to hold on to that until your opponent has the 20 or more cards in their graveyard. Teferi also giving you that card draw. We've even seen like Silver Scrutiny being explored. Depends on how much you're coming up against the mono black discard builds. But Ral's a new one that we got in Bloomburrow. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on it. You can then uptick it as well to create a 1/1 prowess creature. You can downtick it for 3 to draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards. And then when you get to the ultimate, and you can ramp this up pretty quickly, because if you're playing a whole bunch of spells on your turn, the loyalty on Ral can really pop off. And so if you get up to 10, you then draw 3 cards and you get an emblem, which permanently stays around, that gives instant and sorcery spells Storm. So you can just, you can give Lightning Helix Storm and hit them for 4 Lightning Helixes in a row. Is one of the win cons of this deck, outside of Chandra and Teferi. And the other thing too with Chandra is being able to use this for Dig and Ramp. You can cast instances and sorceries from the exiled cards when you uptick for 1. And then you can also just deal X damage to 2 targets. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you copy it. So that works also with the Storm combination. And I think we're going to see more of the Chandra plus Ral combos in the spell slinging archetypes. The downside to this deck is that it is expensive to craft because it is a 3-color space and requires a lot of the mana fixing lands for Jeskai. All right, Boros Control by Leon. Oh, Jeskai Control by Nubel. I'm not sure I said that name. Anyway, I'll post all of the stuff in the description. Boros Control by Leon went 79 and 49 for a 62% win rate into Mythic 594, and I think this deck is looking pretty good. I'm intrigued by the Boros Control space. And so we've got Torch the Towers and Elspeth Smites and Get Losts and Spring-Loaded Saw Blades and Lightning Helix for the mono-red prowess build and the interaction against our early pressure. Clay-Fired Bricks being able to help kind of smooth our land draws and get the Plains card put into our hand as well as gaining life. We've got the Temporary Lockdown and the Vraska's Forge. We've got the Temporary Lockdown to hit on the board flood strategies. We've got Vraska's Forge, which gives us some inevitability if they don't have the artifact hate. We've got Brotherhood's End as another sweeper that can also hate on artifacts. We've got the Caretaker's Talent, and we're going to see this in some deck. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I think there's a deck that the Boros Tokens deck leans more fully into Caretaker's Talent. But this being able to draw cards off of Vraska's Forge is a pretty sweet combination that this deck is also leaning into. And then we have the Sunfalls and the Quintorius Cond, and this one also giving you additional tokens with the 3/2, and then whenever you're playing a card from exile, gaining you the 2 life, as well as hitting the Discover, and then Sunfall. So this is it's similar to the Boros Tokens build, but going a little bit more towards the interaction heavy, and eventually winning the game through some form of win condition. All right, number 7 that I found was a mono red mice by Sei Itsu, and this one went 129 and 82 for a 61% win rate into Mythic 1089. And so the kind of give and take, right? So Rakdos Aggro or Rakdos Prowess has a more consistent turn 3. The downside with it is that if they shut down your turn 3, it has a worse late game than mono red aggro. And so we still have a lot of the tools that we see in the Prowess decks. This one not running the Slick Shot Show Off and leaning more towards the Mice synergies of Manifold Mouse, Emberheart Challenger, and Heartfire Hero. And I think this little combo of Mice in red specifically is here to stay. We've got the Shock and the Monstrous Rage. Typical inclusions, this one replacing Play with Fire during rotation, this one giving you trample damage, so you can kind of build your own Embercleave with the, you don't have to, you can give something double strike and then you can give it trample off of the Monstrous Rage. Great Train Heist is one that I haven't seen a lot, but was curious about during Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So this one allows you to attack again, which can be really devastating for your trample double strike mouse. You can also give things, creatures +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn, and then you can also create tapped treasure tokens with the third ability. But the one that I think is probably the most interesting to me is the first spree option for 4 mana. So we're going to want to run a little bit of a later mana curve if we are going to start bringing in 4-drops like the Great Train Heist to kind of make the deck a little bit more resistant to the single point interaction. Ren's Resolve also gives us really good dig so that we can kind of extend later into the game. Patchwork Banner being able to give all of your mice +1/+1, and the Roughshod Duo is a mouse raccoon that when you expend 4, once you get to your kind of topper end, you can further give your creatures trample. So I think this is doing an interesting thing that I like it. I like where it's going. And then the Rockface Village being able to give your mice the +1/+0 and haste. This deck can really push out a ton of damage. So another nice combo is putting the Monstrous Rage on your Bramble Guard. You have to do it pre-combat, but then being able to give something +5/+0 on one of your, you can punch in for an incredible amount of damage. And the 8th one here is Azorius Control by Low. And Azorius Control definitely struggling a little bit in the new meta because of losing the Wandering Emperor and the Memory Deluge, but still I think viable, right? We have the key pieces, in my opinion, are the Temporary Lockdown, the Sunfall for the Let's Control the Board, and then No More Lies and the 3 Steps Ahead for the excellent counter spells. So then the question is what are you going to do for your win condition? And what's really interesting about this build is it has no win condition. This is a 0 win con control build. And technically there are win cons in the sense of that you can finish the game off with Sunfall tokens, but if they never play anything to the board, then you don't have any tokens to finish off the game, and your only threat is Restless Anchorage. So if they the end and get remove it from your deck, you're not doing anything. There's no mill, there's none of that. So but it does bring in the additional card draw of Silver Scrutiny and the Deduce, which I think helps against the mono black discard, which has been difficult for this deck to deal with. The Union of the Third Path is another one that helps against mono red and the mono black discard decks, because you're simultaneously gaining life as well as drawing a card. So I think both of these are kind of shifting it into a more meta specific spot. And one of the things that's nice about a 0 win con deck is that, so if you come up against a Azorius Control, or you come up against a Jeskai Control or another mirror match, you're probably going to lose that match. But if you're coming up against mono red prowess and mono black discard, they're going to quit as soon as their strategy has been shut down. So you don't actually need to take it all the way to a win con. A lot of times with control, it's more about making your opponent concede. So really curious to see how this one works. And, you know, it did well enough. It went 33 and 22 for 63% win rate into Mythic 889. And so it definitely like has the tools to be able to climb to Mythic, even though it doesn't have a win condition. Thought was very interesting. And I guess you can finish off the game too with Mirix. All right, number 9 is Boros Mice, and this isn't really, I should mention that this isn't in any particular order. Really, I showcased the one that I was most excited about first, but then after this it was just kind of like as I collected them throughout the week. So Boros Mice by Rocket Man went 43 and 24 for a 64% win rate into Mythic 367. And this was one that I was speculating was going to do really well, right? I mean, I had a budget I had a budget Boros Mice build, and I had a brood Boros Mice build as well. And the Celestian Rabbits has been more top performing than the Boros Mice. But this one not leaning into where I took it, which was the Boros Heroic, running the like kind of the hexproof kind of thing that you have in white for 1 white. Blanking on the name again. But yeah, we've got a lot of mice synergies. Cheeky House Mouse, the Swordmaster, the Heartfire Hero, the Ember Heart Challenger, the Manifold Mouse, Raging Battle Mouse, and the Mabel. One of the things that's really nice about Mabel is that you are able to trigger the Valiant off of the equipment. So if you end up kind of needing that kind of late game, I haven't quite finished off my opponent, you remember that you can even equip to a creature that's already equipped to re-trigger the Valiant, to get your Valiant triggers, which I guess this deck isn't running a whole ton of the actual Valiant triggers, but there are a couple. Might of the Meek is another really great way to trigger the Valiant while also giving you trample and drawing a card. So this is really like the Ancestral Anger, as long as you have the mouse synergies. And I'm still seeing some lists being explored where Might of the Meek doesn't even really have that many mice. Felonious Rage being able to give you that +2/+0 and haste, and then if it dies, spawning a 2/2 token. The Cheeky House Mouse's interaction built into a 2/1, and then this is like your board pump. Every time that you target it, your mice get +1/+0, and you can kind of also target the Offspring, because it only triggers once per turn, but works really nice with the Manifold Mouse, also with the Offspring. And because we have the Offspring options, we also want to run kind of a higher land count. So 20, I think, is a little bit on the low side for how much this deck wants to get to 4 mana, in my opinion. But Best of 1 tends to be on a lower curve because of the hand smoother. And we've also got the Lightning Helix, which I think if we're going to be in Boros, we should probably be running the Lightning Helix. It's very similar to the build that I was contemplating, except for it's not running the save your creature for 1 white. So glad to see that it actually made it into Mythic, though. All right, number 10 is Izzet Otters, and we're almost to the end of the list here. So Izzet Otters is Izzet Otters by Fly and Pepper went to 126 and 79 for a 61% win rate for Mythic 353. And I was curious about this space because we got a lot of prowess tools in Bloomburrow, and Otters has been threatening to be a actual viable deck, and I think this is the card that really makes the whole thing work. So Stormcatch Minter makes all of your instances and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast, while also being a 1/1 haste prowess creature. The rest of the deck is going to be, let's just hit them for direct burn damage and card draw and disruption, right? So we have the Phantom Interference and the 3 Steps Ahead as a counterspell. We have the Storm Chaser's talent, which we got in Bloomburrow, which allows us to create a 1/1 Otter with prowess. The later part of it you can, whenever you can pay 3 and a blue to flip it up to return an instant or sorcery card. It's kind of expensive to do that and not developing the board. So a lot of times you're not even going to do the level 2 and the level 3 until you get kind of stuck in the later game. But then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a otter creature token with prowess. But really, if you just view this as a 1/1 for 1 that gives you a 1/1 prowess for 1 blue, it's great in a deck that's a prowess build, right? Putting a lot of pressure early on your opponent. Flick a coin, being able to trigger that prowess while also giving you drawing a card, and then the treasure token kind of discounts the cost of Flick a coin and helps you double spell. Pearl of Wisdom, as long as you have otters, and discounted otters with this makes it into potentially a 1 blue draw 2, which very discounted divination if you have the synergies, which this deck does. You've got the interaction of Shock, Slick Sequence, which is kind of a shock but also draws, and then Lightning Strike, which is either going to be removing problematic blockers or direct damage to your opponent's face. We then have Ral, which, like I mentioned before with Chandra and kind of the later build, the more controlling build instead of the aggro tempo build of this one. Still, if you're casting a whole bunch of these cheap non-creature spells, can get to the point where you get the emblem where instances and sorcery spells you cast have Storm, which then allows you to draw a ton of cards and finish your opponent out with direct burn. So Ral's definitely, people are exploring the Ral space, and I'm really curious to see where the final build lands. So, and then we have one ill-timed explosion, so we can kind of reset the board if we fall behind and then rebuild off of our card draw. Alternatively, this is also just card draw, so do keep that in mind that you don't have to, by choosing what you discard, if you discard 2 lands, it's not going to deal any damage to the board. So, and you don't have to discard anything. So you can just be a 4 mana draw 2, which works okay in this deck. Oh yeah, look at that. There's a sideboard. I think this was a best of 1 build. I don't think it was a best of 3. So I think a lot of these are just considerations. And yeah, so like Explosive Derailment, Slick Shot, Show Off, I think fits well into the prowess builds. Probably should make its way into this deck. Not sure what to take out since I haven't played it. But yeah, some ideas for you on the sideboard. All right, whew, we made it. So it's definitely more work to do as many of these decks instead of just 4 on Sundays. So we'll see if this is something that I keep doing in the future. It also depends on the meta, right? When the meta is a little bit more stale, it's a little bit more difficult to find off-meta picks. And sometimes I wasn't even able to really find like 3 new archetypes every week. So we'll see how it goes. Right now, there's plenty to choose from and plenty to talk about. So we're going to end this with the Orzhov Control build by Revius. Went 82 and 51 for 62% win rate into Mythic 799. And it's kind of like Orzhov Super Friends. So maybe not as heavily enough to call it Super Friends, but it's pretty damn close, right? Because we've got Archangel Elspeth, Kaya, Spirit's Justice, Ashiok, Wicked Manipulator, and Kaya, Intangible Slayer, all as Planeswalkers, which naturally work well against the Sunfalls. So if you're coming up against a lot of the control in the meta, like Domain running the Sunfall, this can kind of give you an alternative win condition. Phyrexian Arena here helps against the mono black discard. Being able to draw a card each turn kind of negates that. We've got the Get Lost, Go for the Throat, and Shieldred's Edict for the early interaction for mono red prowess. We have the Temporary Lockdown and Sunfall and Legions to Ashes for the go wide token decks. This one especially can wreck a lot of the ones that are tokens that are built on the same kind of thing. And then Soul Search, which allows us to look at our opponent's hand and give us some targeted hate. Kind of curious about whether or not the Caretaker's Talent is just better than the hand hate for Soul Search, because these tokens off of Ashiok and Kaya and Elspeth would probably benefit from the card draw that is coming from the Caretaker's Talent. So something to consider. And this one also coming in with a full play set. I don't know if this was a best of 3 list. Someone was playing in best of 1. But we've got Duress, Doorkeeper Thrall, which works well against Boros and Domain, Elspeth Smite for mono red, Pest Control, Temporary Lockdown, just some alternative ideas to explore. So I hope that gives you some good ideas for your own builds and your own, experiences with climbing the ladder to Mythic. Excuse me. And yeah, especially that first one, the Boros Tokens build. Definitely excited to check that one out myself. Hopefully gives you an answer to some of the frustrations people have been having with the mono red prowess and the mono black discard. One thing to say, because I've been through a lot of rotations, is every deck has a weakness and it has a strength, right? And so if you're having a problem with a certain deck, reach out to me. Ask me like what would I be doing against this counter, against this strategy. I keep coming up against it. Like, trust me, there are answers. That's how the game is designed, right? And I think they've done a really cool job of. We're already starting to see kind of a. We're already starting to see a rock paper scissors being established, which is a good sign for a healthy meta. That you kind of have these rotating 3 archetypes that are the primary core of the meta, kind of being the mono red prowess, the mono black discard, and I think Boros Tokens is kind of looking like the next slot. Control is struggling a little bit, but again, there were several options in today's meta breakers that were all control decks, so it's not like it's completely not a viable option, right? But anyway, hope that helps you. Remember to click like and subscribe, and if you feel like helping me out monetarily, becoming a YouTube member would be awesome. And I'll be on tomorrow for the best of 1, best of 3 meta review, where I'll talk about some of the more on-meta picks like Celestia Rabbits, mono red aggro, Rakdos aggro, Domain, several different types of Domain, Rakdos Lizards, mono black skeletons, and mono black aggro, assuming things don't also shift in one day, because things are still settling. So take care, everybody. Have a good one.